stand and let's worship together. I was lost with a broken heart. You picked me up, now I'm set apart. From the ash I am born again, forever safe in the Savior's hand. You are more than my words can say. I'll follow you, Lord, for all my days. Fix my eyes, follow in your ways. Forever free and unending grace. 'Cause you are my freedom. We lift you higher, lift you higher. Your love, your love, your love, ever ending. Oh, 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 you are alive in us. Nothing can take your place. You are all we need. Your love has set us free. In the midst of the darkest night, let your love be the shining light, breaking chains that were holding me. You sent your son down and set me free. Everything of this world will fade. I'm pressing on till I see your face, and will live that your will be done. I won't stop till your kingdom come. 'Cause you are my freedom. We lift you higher, lift you higher. Your love, your love, your love, ever ending. Oh, 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 you are alive in us. Nothing can take your place. You are all we all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? As I walk now through the valley, let your love rise above every fear. Like the sun shaping the shadow, in my weakness your glory appears. Not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? Not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? For a minute was I forsaken. The Lord is in this place. The Lord is in this place. Come, Holy Spirit, dry bones awaken. The Lord is in this place. The Lord is in this place. Not for a minute was I forsaken. The Lord is in this place. The Lord is in this place. Come, Holy Spirit, dry bones awaken. The Lord is in this place. The Lord is in this place. Not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Please meet me here again.
Hear the word roaring as thunder, with a new future to tell. For the dry season is over, there is a cloud beginning to swell. To the skies, heavy with blessing, lift your eyes, offer your heart. Jesus Christ, open the heavens, now we receive the Spirit of God. We receive anticipation, we await the promise to come. Everything that you have spoken will come to pass. Let it be done. Everything that you have spoken will come to pass. Let it be done.
There's a table that you've prepared for me in the presence of my enemies.
not alone in a world like that. And we're surrounded by your protection. We're surrounded by your care. Nothing slips into our pass through your fingers first. And whether we understand it or whether we don't, it's still the hand of God upon our life. We take comfort in that, thinking that we're not left alone in this world. So help us, Father. Sometimes we don't see your protection. Sometimes we don't understand what you're doing. But we do want to hold on to this truth, Father. We celebrate it. And it gives us centeredness. It gives us a place to stand, a place to be courageous in a dangerous world. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, welcome someone to Horizons, will you? Everybody get a proper greeting, a handshake, high five, Horizons hug, something that said, welcome. We're glad you're here. Hey, if I haven't met you yet, I'm Steve Felder. I'm the campus pastor here at this location. We have about 6 other locations. I'm the guy here. There's a campus pastor every other location, and plus we have an online campus. So we're just glad that you're here. Glad you're here today. When you came in, you should have gotten one of these, a bulletin. This is a series we're in right now. Because we are in a broken world, that broken world creates lots of prisons. It creates lots of places that keep us trapped. And Jesus came to set us free. He said he came to free captives and to open prison doors. And so we're looking at how he does that in places in our life where we sometimes get caught. We get trapped. And we're going to look at another one of those in just a few minutes. So inside of that bulletin, there are a few things that we'd like to point out. One of them is a connection card, looks like this. And if this is the first time you've been with us or I haven't met you yet, if you would just fill out the top part of that, and at the end of the service, rather than dropping this connection card in the bucket back here at the end, I'm going to be over there where that light just came on, that welcome sign. I'll be over there. If it's your first time or I haven't met you, just swing over there. I'd love to meet you. If you got a few minutes, I'll give you a little information about the church and answer any questions you've got. But if you don't have time, I'd still love to meet you. All right, so I'll be over there right afterwards. For the rest of you, be here every week. If you're a regular, and just fill that bottom part out, put your prayer concerns in the back, drop it in the bucket on the way out the door. Also, when you came in, inside of that is a offering envelope, looks like this. And gosh, we take on projects all over the world. We take on projects here. We help collegians that have graduated in this area. We pick a collegian each year that's fitting and suiting, and we help them in their college career. We do all sorts of things, but we can only do those things because you give generously and help us. And so, by the way, just so I know, do we have any high school or college graduates with us? Somebody's going to graduate from high school or college. If you raise your hand, stand up. Yeah, stand up just a minute here. So you're both going to be, not you, right here. Yeah. So this is what day's the day? 24th. Hey, right here. Yeah. So anyway, if you would like to help us as we do ministry, there's about 4 different ways you can give. You can drop your information. You can drop your gift in a bucket here. You can give online. You can take this home, put it in the mail if you're not sure what you want to do. It's postage paid, self-addressed. You can text to give. Just maybe put the $sign before the amount. All those things are available, but it's all the way that we make God's kingdom move forward with a Horizon stamp on it. So if you can do that, great. So I think there is a prayer room to my left, your right, and Bev is in there. She'd love to pray with you if you have a need. during or after the service, we're going to have a couple of announcements, and then we're going to come back. We're going to give the fifth message in this series on solitary confinement. So let's take a look at the announcements, and then we'll be right back.
Hi, moms and dads. I'm Pastor Kelly, and we want to let you know about the classes going on right now for your kids. If you have your kids with you in the service, we'd like to invite them to come experience the fun and learn important life lessons from the Bible. We also offer nursery for infants and for toddlers. If your child gets fussy with you here in the sanctuary, please be courteous to those around you and use one of our cry rooms in the back of the sanctuary. You'll be able to see and hear everything, and your child can enjoy the extra freedom. And now, here's your Lost Creek campus pastor, Steve Felder.
Well, I do want to give a shout out to all of our online folks and our campuses that they kind of tune in on this part of the service for us. We have one message. Every campus has its own worship and leaders and small group ministries, kids ministries, all those kind of things. But each campus shares. We all have the same message. So we want to just welcome our campuses in for this part of the service. When I was about 11 years old, I was in Cub Scouts, and my Cub Scout manual listed projects for me to complete that would help me become a well-rounded young man. And some of those projects were designed to develop some virtue in my life, and other projects were designed to develop some practical skill. Now, in scouting, if you complete enough of those projects, then you get a merit badge. And by the time I was 11, I had earned the Wolf badge, and I was trying to get the next one. In fact, I said, "There it is." I went in my jewelry box. I said, "I think I still got that thing." I opened it up, and there it is, 55 years old. And that's the original. That's the Cub Scout badge that I earned. That's a little slider that goes up on the lanyard that goes around your neck, the little bandana. And both those things, I still have them. They're probably ancient. They're mosaic or something. But anyway, I had earned one of those, and I was trying to get my next one. I wanted to get the next one, and to get the next one, I had to build a sailboat, and I had to use some basic hand tools. Like I had to use something like this. I had to use a handsaw. I had to use a drill. I had to use a piece of copper to make this pole. I had to take string and a piece of fabric to make the sail. I had to figure out how to do that. And so, in most of these projects that that Scout Manual outlined, they encouraged fathers and sons to work together to complete them. But my dad really wasn't really interested in scouting, so I decided to tackle this sailboat project on my own. And the night that I decided to start the project, my mom and my sister were off at a mother-daughter banquet. My brother had gone off to see a friend, and my dad was in the living room watching the NBC Nightly News with Chet Huntley and David Brinkley. And so I brought a long board into the kitchen, and I picked up, this is the actual saw. That was my dad's saw. And I picked that up, and I brought it into the kitchen, and I set it down, and I measured out about a foot, and I sawed off a foot, and I had my basic piece to make my sailboat. And then I flipped it up on its end, and I measured across, and I found the middle on one end, and I put a dot there, and then I measured down both sides, dot, dot. I took a pencil, and I connected this center one to here, and this center one to here, and then I had a template for a sailboat. All I had to do was saw this piece off and saw that piece off, and I would have a bow to my boat, And so I took my saw, saw in hand, and I put that 1 foot piece of wood on a chair in our kitchen, and I set my knee on it to hold it with one piece, and I grabbed it with my hand like this to hold the other piece, and I started to go back and forth just slowly on that edge, trying to get a little bit of a little groove started so that the saw could follow it. I got that. It was doing okay, and I thought, well, I think I got it. And so I reached down and I gave it a good pull back and like that. And those teeth, they spit out that wood, and the groove went a little deeper. And I said, oh, I got it. And I started to push it, and it wouldn't go, like that. And so I went back, and I said, so I pulled it back again, got another one, and I said, I'm going to push it harder this time. So I pushed real hard like that, and it popped out of that groove and went right down the inside of my center finger on my left hand. And that saw ripped through my flesh like butter. I mean, it left a jagged, gaping wound that went all the way to the bone. I said, well, look at there, blood was going everywhere. I ran over to the kitchen sink, and I'm washing it off, trying to see how bad it is. And I grabbed a towel and wrapped it up, and I just couldn't get the thing to stop bleeding, And so I said, I better go ask my dad what to do. So I walked into the living room with this bloody towel in my hand, and I said, Dad, I cut myself with a saw. And he said, and I opened it up and showed him. He looked at it and he said, no, you'll be okay. Go put a Band-Aid on it. I said, oh, all right. And he went back to watching the evening news. He just didn't want to be bothered, So I did what he said. I went back to the kitchen. I wrapped some gauze around it, and remember that white medical tape that you got? I'd put that white medical tape around different places to hold the gauze in place, and I went back to working on my sailboat until my mom came home. And when my mom came home, she saw this bloody bandage on my finger, and she says, "What in the world happened to you?" I said, "Well, I cut myself with a saw." She says, "Well, let me see it." So I pried back the tape, and I opened it up, and I remember my mother gasping and her knees buckling like that, and she turned as white as a ghost. I mean, she was reaching out for a chair like this while she was calling for my dad in the kitchen, in the living room, but she wasn't saying, "Honey, come help me." She was saying, "Marvin Basil, get in here," like that. So when my dad walked into the kitchen, my mom was pale with nausea and red with fury. I mean, it ticked her off. It really made her mad. She was livid that my dad had ignored the severity of the wound in order to just keep watching the evening news. And so my mom couldn't even look at the finger without passing out, And so she told my dad, says, "You take him into the bathroom, and so I'm going to stand out here, and I'm going to tell you what to do." And she walked him through the whole thing. She couldn't look at it, but she could tell him what to do. And so my dad's in there washing it, and so by the time I get done, I walked out of that bathroom that evening, but my father was the one who washed my throbbing finger and baptized it in peroxide and put fresh bandages on it and made it to stop it from bleeding and all those things. He was the one that did those things. But when I went to bed that night, I didn't feel close or connected to my dad. I felt close and connected to my mother. Because even as a kid, I knew the difference between complying and caring. Now, looking back on that night, I see things now as an adult that I didn't see as a kid. At 11 years of age, I understood that my mom was caring for me. But now, as an adult, I can see that she gave me some pretty important gifts that night. For example, that gash on my finger looked pretty serious to me, but hey, what do I know? I'm just a kid, right? And so when I went in and showed my dad, and he minimized it and told me, "I'll go put a Band-Aid on it. It's not serious." The message he was giving to me was, "No, you're wrong. This isn't serious. Get over it." That was the message I got from my dad. But when my mom saw the same wound that my dad did, she reacted very differently. And her reaction told me I wasn't crazy. This really was. It was a pretty serious injury, and it needed some immediate attention. And that was a gift from my mom. And when my mom saw the severity of the gift, it was pretty clear to her that she didn't have the power to fix it, but she did have the power to wash it and disinfect it so that healing could start in it. And that was a gift. And then she gave me this third gift. That night she chose to put my healing first, and her desire to impart wisdom to me second. I mean, when my mom realized that I had run a saw down my finger and cut it to the bone, she didn't begin lecturing me on how to properly hold a board so I didn't cut myself. She didn't scold me for trying to make a sailboat without adult supervision. She didn't make me promise never to pick up a saw again. No, she put aside her need to impart wisdom to me and focused on healing the wound. There would be a time for me to get wisdom, but this wasn't a time. This was a time to deal with healing. Now today, I can tell you today, I never pick up a saw without thinking about that scar. And whenever I pick up a saw and I start to saw, I always position my hands, and I'm aware of where my hands need to be because of that. I got hurt, and I don't want to hurt myself again. And that scar taught me some very important wisdom lessons. But on that night, the night that I cut myself, my immediate need was not wisdom. My need was healing. Wisdom could show me how to avoid hurting myself again, but wisdom does not have the power to heal a bleeding finger. And so my mom focused on my healing first, and she saved her wisdom for later. And that was a gift. Now you may say, well, come on, Steve, that's just common sense. That's just common sense. And I would say, you're absolutely right. I agree with you. It is common sense. And most of us give the 3 common sense gifts freely to our friends and to our families and to our kids when they have been wounded physically. But for some reason, these same common sense gifts often slip through our fingers and elude us when our loved ones suffer from wounds that we can't see. You know, not all of our childhood wounds are physical. We're going to see in our passage today that abuse and neglect leave deep gashes in our soul. They leave wounds that we feel deeply, but others can't see them. And because they can't see them, they often withhold these common sense gifts from us, the same gifts my mother gave me that night. And rather than affirming the severity of our wound, they minimize what happened to us and send messages that we just need to get over it. Rather than washing our wounds so that God can do his healing work, they offer us some crazy quick fix. And rather than focusing on our healing first, and saving wisdom for later, they move immediately to wisdom, and they begin telling us what we should have done and could have done so we wouldn't have been wounded. And somehow that makes us feel like that our woundedness is our own darn fault. So we bear God's image. And because we do, our innate value, our built-in value, is to be celebrated by others. And our God-given dignity is to be respected by others, even though we are flawed and imperfect creatures. And when someone's words or someone's actions trample upon our dignity and deny our worth, we call such treatment of an image bearer abuse. And by its very nature, such abuse wounds the soul and causes the soul to bleed. But when our soul is wounded by abuse, it doesn't bleed blood. It bleeds shame. Not the good kind of shame that gives us a corporate sense of right and wrong. Not the good kind of shame that says, hey, you don't wear a bathing suit to a church service. Not that kind of shame. Not the good kind of shame. No, abuse, an abused soul bleeds a toxic kind of shame. It's a shame that internalizes the abuse and begins to doubt our own God-given dignity and begins to deny our own God-given worth. That kind of shame. Now, every kind of abuse wounds the soul and traps us in some kind of shame. But sexual abuse is particularly cruel. It's particularly cruel because many times it wounds the soul of a child or of a teenager. And 91% of the time, those wounds are inflicted by somebody that we know. Somebody that we know and we trusted. And because we knew them and trusted them, they tricked us. Tricked us into trusting them and then turned around and abused us. Now today we're going to look at a story about a young woman named Tamar. And when the time of the story, she's probably about 16, maybe 17 years old. She's the daughter of King David, and she's in the innocence of her youth. And during that time when she was just coming into her womanhood, she was sexually abused, not by a stranger, but by her half-brother Amnon, who was at least a decade older than her. Her story is found in 2 Samuel chapter 13. It's tragic and it's painful, but I believe Tamar's story can give us some important insights into the spiritual dimensions of sexual abuse and how to recover from it. And if you are a survivor of that kind of abuse, of such abuse, then Tamar's story can help you. Her story can help you rewrite your story so that God can do his healing work in you and free you from solitary confinement. Now, I'm not telling you that a 40-minute message this is going to fix you. It's not what I'm telling you. But I do believe that this message can do for you what my mom did for me 5 decades ago. It can jumpstart a healing process in you. I hope today's message reassures you that you're not crazy. You know, what happened to you was horrible. And it left a deep gash upon your soul, and you don't need a Band-Aid. No, you need a process that lets Jesus lead you out of your shame into healing and into freedom. And that doesn't happen in a 40-minute message, but it certainly can start there. And just as my physical wounds needed to be washed and disinfected, so those invisible wounds of yours, they need the same thing. And so today, my hope is that this message will wash away some of the lies that keep you trapped in shame so that God can do his healing work in you. And lastly, this isn't a message that's going to be about what you should have done or could have done so you wouldn't have been abused. There'll be time when you can look at your scars and learn wisdom from what you went through. But this is not that time. This message is not about wisdom. It's about healing. Healing first, wisdom second. So let's turn to Tamar's story and let's begin to wash away some of the lies that keep us trapped in a story of shame. And let's start by asking a question. Here's an important question. Who was responsible? If you were on the receiving end of, and you've experienced this wound in your life, who was responsible for the obsession that drove your abuser to abuse you? That's an important question. Who's responsible for that obsession? And to answer that question, you really can't ask your abuser because abusers lie. They lie to protect themselves and they lie to enslave us. But we can listen to God because God's going to tell you the truth. And when God tells you the truth, it's the kind of truth that sets you free. And so let's look at our first point and let's try to wash away one of those lies that traps us in shame. You know, you didn't cause the obsession in your abuser. You were the target of it. Now, your abuser would tell you you caused it. God tells you, no, you didn't cause it. You were the target of it. And Tamar shows you that. 2 Samuel chapter 13 opens with Amnon, the oldest son of King David and the heir to the throne of Israel, in a full-blown obsession. He is fixated on his half-sister Tamar, who has blossomed into a beautiful woman. But Amnon doesn't care that Tamar is his stepsister. He just wants her. And he wants her before anyone else has her. Now, Amnon called what he was experiencing love. But he didn't want to share his life with Tamar. He wanted to sexually possess her. He wanted to exploit her. Now, Amnon called it love, but it wasn't love. It was a sexual obsession. The Bible says that Amnon was frustrated to the point of illness because he couldn't figure out, and I quote, he couldn't figure out how to do anything to her. That's an ominous and creepy statement. You know what I mean? That's just bizarre. But that's what he says. And that statement speaks volumes as to what's going on inside of Amnon's head when he's looking at his stepsister. The Bible says, in the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Amnon became frustrated to the point of illness on account of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now, at this point, Amnon is struggling with his own internal demons, but he hasn't acted upon his obsession yet. But all that changes when his cousin Jonadab steps into the picture. Now, Jonadab is a scheming young man who has this knack for reading people. And he has this knack for using the insights that he gains to manipulate them. And when he saw his cousin Amnon in a full-blown obsession, he wanted to know who he was fixated on. And when Jonadab found out that Tamar was the focus of Amnon's obsession, he spelled out a way, just rolled off his tongue. He knew immediately what to do. He spelled out a way for Amnon to get close to Tamar, to win her trust, and to take what he wanted. He even offered Amnon a way to implicate his father in his treachery. This was catnip to Amnon. He could not resist it. It gave him a way to have Tamar manipulate his father onto both of them in one treacherous scheme. He couldn't wait to do it. Now, David was a disengaged father who tried to make up for his physical and emotional absence in the home by giving his kids whatever they wanted. Jonadab read David like a book. He understood him. And he suggested to Amnon that he pretend to be sick, because Jonadab knew if David found out that Amnon was sick, he would come to him and try to make things better by giving Amnon whatever he asked for. And so Amnon said, when David shows up and takes the bait, or Jonadab says, when David shows up and takes the bait, here's what you need to do. You need to look sick. And you need to ask your father to send Tamar to your room to make some of those special cakes that you love, because just tell him that they always make you feel better. Jonadab knew David would grant that request, and when he did Tamar, he knew she would magically appear in Amnon's bedroom, and Amnon could figure out the rest of it for himself. Now, Amnon loved the plan, and he implemented it. And it worked just the way that Jonadab said it would. Amnon pretended to be sick. David showed up right on cue. Amnon made his request. Tamar appeared at his bedside to fix him some of those little heart-shaped cakes that always helped him feel better. And the whole thing was set up by Jonadab and Amnon. But here's the question I want you to answer. Here's the question. What caused Amnon's obsession? Now, if you ask Amnon, he would tell you that Tamar caused it. He would blame his obsession on her beauty, or on the way that she walked, or on the way she smiled, or on the way that she wore her hair. He would blame it on his obsession on Tamar. But Tamar didn't cause Amnon's obsession. It was caused by a black hole of need inside of Amnon, and his belief that Tamar would somehow fill that black hole up and make him feel complete and whole if he could just have her. Tamar didn't create Amnon's black hole of need. She didn't create the obsession that flowed out of it. She was the unwitting target of it. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us specifically where that black hole of need came from inside of Amnon, but we do get a couple clues. David was a great king. He was an amazing warrior, but he was a distant and disengaged father. He had 6 wives. Busy man. And it seems that the only sure way that one of his sons could get David to show up and pay attention to him was to get sick. Now, many men who grow up with distant and disengaged fathers enter into adulthood with this black hole of need inside of them. And they come to believe that the sexual love of a woman will somehow fill that black hole up and make them feel okay, make them feel complete. Now, some men marry and give that impossible task to their wife. I did, and nearly destroyed our marriage. Other men move from one sexual conquest to another, believing that if they just find the right woman, then that woman will fill up that black hole inside of them, and that obsession will go away. But then there are men like Amnon, who doesn't only want a sexual conquest, he wants control. And so he became a predator. When a person says, I want not just sexual conquest, I want sexual control, It's easy to become a predator, and it's easy to become a predator on the weakest of our folks, of our people, on children and teenagers, because they know they can manipulate them and deceive them and overpower them and use them to feed their obsession. When a person does that to a child, a person does that to a teenager, we say that person is sexually abusing them. Now, if you've been targeted and abused by a person like that, like Amnon, a person who systematically took what he wanted by controlling more and more of your life, then part of your healing is going to be to take back that control. You know, the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. That is, the Spirit of God wants to help you to control you. The Spirit of God doesn't want you to be controlled by a person with an obsession. He wants you to know how to control you, and He will help you to do that. And a very simple yet profound step in reclaiming the control of your life is to edit that internal story, because it's been whispered in your ear that somehow you're responsible for their obsession, and it is a lie. It is a lie. And I'm asking you to refuse to believe it, refuse to take the blame for that, refuse to accept that somehow you created that obsession. Tamar didn't create the emptiness inside of Amnon, and she certainly didn't create the obsession that grew out of it. That emptiness turned inside of Amnon long before Tamar showed up on the scene. She didn't create that obsession. She was targeted by it. And when she was, Amnon hatched a carefully orchestrated scheme that ended in betrayal and abuse. Now, I remember sitting in my office a number of years ago. I was here when it happened, but I was sitting in the office talking to a man who had targeted a 13-year-old girl online. He had groomed her for months and then convinced her to meet him face-to-face in a local park in our area here. But when he showed up at the park, that 13-year-old girl wasn't waiting for him. A group of police officers were, and he was arrested. And I met this man before he went to his trial. And in that session, he said he wanted me to help him. I said, well, okay, you want me to help me? Then here's my question. How did you get here? And he said, well, I don't know what you mean. I said, well, how did you start flirting with a 13-year-old girl online? And how did you get to a place where you said, I think it's a good idea that we meet in the park? How did you get there? And he looked at me without blinking an eye and said, well, it just happened. And I said, I don't believe that for a minute. I don't believe that for a minute. I said, let's start with something simple. Just start with this. How did you, a 40-year-old man, meet a 13-year-old girl online? How did that get started? Tell me that. He looked me right in the eye and said, it just happened. These sexual abusers seldom take responsibility for their actions. They seldom own the fact that they systematically and carefully groom a child in order to win their trust so they can betray them and take what they want. Instead, they hide behind a lie that it just happened. It's a subtle way of blaming their intentional exploitation of a child on chance. But I can tell you this, abusing a child never just happens. It doesn't. And as a survivor of abuse, you may have never considered this. You may have believed that lie all your life, that it just happened. Or you may have figured this out, that it didn't just happen. For many survivors, it's both enraging and freeing to unmask their abuser. And it's both enraging and freeing to tell themselves the truth about what the abuser did, to set them up, to win their trust, and take what they wanted. But even though facing that truth is painful, facing that truth is an important part of washing away a lie that keeps you trapped in shame. And that's our next point. Your sexual abuse did not just happen. It didn't. Now, every abuser will tell you that, but it didn't just happen. You were carefully groomed, and then you were betrayed. Now, Amnon followed the devious plan that he had worked out with Jonadab. And he faked an illness. And David showed up just as he said he would, right on cue. And the Bible says, so Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And the king came to see him. And Amnon said, well, I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some of those special cakes, and literally heart-shaped cakes, in my sight, so I may eat from her hand. Well, what happened? Well, David became his messenger. He sent word to Tamar, and she dropped everything to come to her brother's aid. She set up a little kitchen outside of his bedroom, made those little heart-shaped cakes that Amnon said that would help him recover from his sudden illness. Tamar had absolutely no idea that this whole thing was a ruse to get her close to the man who wanted to violate her. But the reality was that Amnon was patiently grooming her so he could prey upon Tamar's kind heart. That's the evil of it. Now, when those little cakes were ready, Tamar took a pan of them and gave them to her brother so he could eat them and feel better. But Amnon didn't want Tamar's cakes, and he didn't give a lick about Tamar's kind heart. He wanted her alone in his room so he could take what he wanted. The Bible says when she took the pan, then she took the pan and served him the bread, and he refused to eat. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said. So everyone left him. And then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into my bedroom so I may eat from your hand. You're the only one that can really help me feel better. This is a hard truth, but it is the truth, and I'm going to just share it with you as carefully as I can. When an abuser grooms a child, they look into that child's heart, and they figure out what is missing from their primary caregiver. Then they offer to provide that missing piece that child is longing for. And they offer it to them in order to win over a piece of their heart and get them to trust them so that they can get that child to be attached to them and then betray them. It's sinister, it's calculated, it's evil, but it is true. It is how it works. Now, Tamar was the daughter of a large royal family. That family had a powerful but busy father, and in that family, it was just easy to get lost in the crowd. It was easy never to be picked. It was easy never to feel special. It was easy never to really be needed. You're just kind of there. Every teenager wants those things. But when they are missing in the home, they don't just want them, they long for them. And when Amnon saw that longing in Tamar's heart, he preyed upon it. And he had his own father carry the message to Tamar that he needed her, special, her, because only she could make the cakes that would make him feel better. And when she brought Amnon the pan of special cakes, he insisted everyone else needed to leave, because the only person that could really help him, he said, was Tamar. And then he insisted if she just sat by his bed and just fed him a couple of those cakes, that he would surely feel better. And Tamar was happy to help. I mean, it felt good to be picked. It felt good to be special. It felt good to be needed. She had no idea that she was being groomed. But she was. She was. You know, when I talk to people who've been through this and they figured out, it is enraging to look in the rearview mirror of your life and realize that when you thought you were developing a special relationship, that someone who needed you and someone who wanted to nurture you, you figure out they were just setting you up and grooming you. It is infuriating. And that kind of betrayal makes it very hard for folks who've been through that kind of abuse to trust anyone as an adult. And you can see why. Now, you thought your abuser was being kind to you, when in reality, you found out they were just grooming you. They wanted to win over a piece of your heart so they could take what they wanted. And many survivors have made a secret vow in their heart to say, I will never trust a kind or gentle person again. They may not even said it out loud to themselves, but that's the vow of their heart. And because of that vow, they end up dating and marrying people who are harsh and cruel and abusive to them. It is painful, but it is also empowering to unmask your abuser and expose his tactics. But when you do, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, now you know that the kindness and the gentleness and the attentiveness of your abuser was a fake. It was a fraud. It was a setup. But that's freeing to know it. But now, on the other hand, you have to figure out how to distinguish the real thing real tenderness, real kindness, real attentiveness that people offer you. How do you distinguish that from this fake that you were offered? That is really hard to do, and it's very hard to do on your own. And that's why many people find it's very helpful to be part of a same-sex group that's working to untie those kind of knots together. They find that they need a place where they can share their victories, a place where they can get feedback on their uncertainties. They need a place where they're safe. You can find that kind of group sometimes online with Christian groups that want to help you with this. You can go to a counselor, and they can help. He or she can help you untie your knots. Thousands of survivors of childhood sexual abuse have found that kind of help and that kind of healing, the very things they were looking for when they stepped into a CR meeting. And they found that they could be a safe place where they could work through these issues. You know, Mary Ann Weller she's the congregational care pastor here at Lost Creek. She's also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And she had to work through her issues before there was a CR. But I asked her to share a little bit of her story and tell us how she found help and how we might do the same.
Probably the primary lie that I believed was that I wasn't worth making a stink over, because my mom said we couldn't make a stink in the neighborhood by addressing it. So that would be the primary lie. Probably the secondary one was everybody else's feelings were more important than mine. It didn't matter how I felt, just as long as everybody else was happy. What gave me the courage to tell someone and start the healing process would have been seeing how it was messing up my relationship with my husband, and also being quite concerned about how it might impact our daughters. So there was a point where I knew that something needed to change, and they were the motivators. I think a spouse probably needs to allow the person to talk about it if they need to talk about it, and also just be sensitive to it, because there's triggers, there's things that bring up memories and things like that, and just being sensitive to those kind of things. I think anybody in this situation needs to have some good friends they can talk to that will give them godly counsel. If that's not enough, obviously a pastor or a pastoral counselor, just someone that they can say what they need to say and get truth brought to their attention to replace the lies that they've believed.
You know, if you're the survivor of childhood sexual abuse, it's terrible, it's a horrible thing. It happened in a toxic relationship where someone preyed upon you and preyed upon your desire to be needed, your desire to be nurtured, your desire to be celebrated. But the catch-22 of that is to heal as a survivor, you have to form healthy relationships where you're needed, where you're nurtured, and where you're celebrated. And for somebody that's been through this tragedy and this horrible experience, that is really scary. It's very hard. In fact, many have said, I just don't think I can trust anybody who's warm and supportive to me. And because of that, they find themselves living in solitary confinement. But one of the things that may help you step out of that solitary confinement and step into a supportive and healing community like Celebrate Recovery is to give back the shame that you're carrying. Because it's really not your shame. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your abuser. Now, if you lay it down, your abuser probably is not going to pick it up, but that doesn't mean you can't lay it down. And that brings us to our final point. The shame that you are carrying doesn't belong to you. So give it back. Give it back to your abuser. When everyone left the room and Tamar began to feed Amnon her cakes that she had made, that he had requested, that's when she saw Amnon's real motives for the first time. Amnon grabbed Tamar, asked her to give herself to him, and when she refused, resisted, tried to reason with him, he became violent. He overpowered her, and he raped her. Now, raping your half-sister is a disgraceful act. And as Amnon looked at the horror on Tamar's face, the tears streaming down her eyes, the utter humiliation of this girl who was sobbing on his bed, it all became a mirror that reflected his shame back at him. And it said to Amnon, you did this. You did this. This is your shame. And as a result, the Bible says that Amnon suddenly hated Tamar just as intently as he had desired her. And rather than owning his shame in that moment, he heaped his shame on the girl that he had just violated and abused. And he had her thrown out of his house and publicly humiliated. The Bible says, Amnon said, get this woman out of here and bolt the door behind her. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the garments, this ornamental robe she was wearing. And she put her hand on her head and she went through the streets weeping as she went. And Tamar lived with her brother Absalom in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman, trapped in isolation. Throwing Tamar out into the street was Amnon saying to the world, she tried to seduce me while I was sick, and I rebuffed this degenerate woman, and I threw her out of my house, and I bolted the door behind her so that she couldn't get back in. He cast himself as the victim and made Tamar the perpetrator, the seductress, who was supposed to try to take advantage of him while he was sick. And in doing so, he heaped his own shame and disgrace on his victim's head. Tamar was in shock from the rape and the public humiliation, and she went into Amnon's. She left Amnon's house that day carrying the shame of Amnon, not her shame, Amnon's shame. She tore her dress. She put ashes on her face. She put her hand on her head. It was a posture of desolation. It was what when you're taken captive and marched and humiliated through a city of your captors, they put their hand on their head. Tamar's brother Absalom found her wandering through the streets sobbing, and he immediately understood what happened, and he took her into his home. And Tamar's rape became a family secret nobody could talk about. And she lived as a desolate woman, trapped in solitary confinement in his home. Absalom's plotted for 2 years and then murdered Amnon for raping his sister. But Absalom's revenge didn't heal Tamar's shame. You may think that what you need is revenge, but I can tell you revenge won't heal you. Vengeance is God's business, and I can assure you there'll be a reckoning for those who abuse you or anyone else. But until that day comes, the one thing you too can do is you can give back the shame that is not yours. It doesn't belong to you, it belongs to your abuser. If you wait for your abuser to ask for it back, you'll wait a very long time because he never will, or she never will. Now, giving their shame back and stopping and kind of refusing to carry that shame, it can begin with something as simple as writing a letter that spells out. It spells out to your abuser what they did and how they deceived you and how they betrayed you and how they harmed you and the effects that's had upon your life, and lay that back at their feet, telling them specifically, I give you back your shame. I refuse to carry it any longer. And then physically just take it and lay it down. You don't need to send the letter. But you do need to write it. Your heart needs to write it. Because you didn't have an affair with your abuser. That's not what happened. They will tell you that, but that is a lie. You did not have an affair with your abuser. You were targeted, groomed, deceived, betrayed, humiliated, and hurt by someone who did all of those things with shameless intentionality. It's not your shame. So why don't you lay it down? Why don't you give it back? Mary Ann was caught in that shame. It took her years to erase that curse from her life, but she erased it. And you can too. But it starts with taking a step. It starts with picking up the phone. It starts with stepping into CR on Friday night at Lost Creek or at Salem on a Monday night or at a CR near you on any other night. It starts with one step in the right direction. And the healing can begin. I'm asking you to take that step. I'm asking you to celebrate your dignity and celebrate your worth as an image bearer and take that step. And we'll support you. God bless you. God bless you. If this is your first time, I'll see you right over there.